Money. We all want it. We all need it. And deep down, we're all more than willing to betray our close friends and loved ones to get more of it. But what is money? Who makes it and decides how much we get? Who decides how much these scraps of piece of paper and wool are worth? And why are we so willing to dedicate our entire adult lives just to getting more of it? All these questions and more on this episode of Low Budget Economics. I'm Mr. Thompson, this is Cedric the Skull, and this is our new intro. It's low budget, very low budget. It's low budget economics with Cedric the Skull. Hello and welcome back. This is going to be a very brief history and synopsis on the basics of money. You will find more information in the following module and in video links that I will post below to help supplement your learning. None of them will be required to view, but I know a lot of you are very bored right now, so you might as well use that time to learn a couple of things about world history, including the history of money, because you're going to need more of it anyway. As for now, we are going to go over a brief history of where money came from and how it turned into paper over time. For that, let's go to the board. What do you think the oldest form of money has been in human society? What have people throughout most of human history have found valuable and worth enough to trade for other things? It's not gold. It's not food. It is actually the cowrie shell right behind me here. The cowrie shells are found along seashores throughout the world. They are hard to acquire, thus making them scarce, hard to come by, and at the same time, some people find them beautiful. Personally, I think they're hideous. But that's neither here or there. Later on, shells were replaced by precious metals and other forms of valuable artifacts, such as gold. Gold. The most famous of all precious metals, though things like copper, iron, bronze, silver, and platinum have also been used over time. When money first came out, especially in the United States, it was always backed by gold. And you could always turn in your dollar bill in for a dollar equivalent worth of gold at your nearest bank. Eventually, though, in the 1900s, we got rid of this and switched to complete paper currency, thus getting rid of the gold standard altogether. Why this is a story for another time. But just know, your paper today is just that, paper. There is no metal, no fancy shell, and especially no gold backing its value. But that doesn't seem to have decreased our want of money. Let's take a look at a few vocabulary terms to help us understand what it is and how it functions in our society a little bit better. In order for something to be money, it has to meet a lot of different criteria. The first one is it must be durable. Money is going to get handed a lot from person to person, and it needs to be able to retain its shape and value even through all those transactions. So it needs to have a nice solid physical element to it. Money must also be portable. This was the big issue with cowrie shells and gold, because both of those things are rather heavy. Now imagine you wanted to buy a house or a car, you'd have to rent a wheelbarrow in order to deliver all that shells and gold to make your purchase. It's just inconvenient. Money also needs to be divisible. Say if you're trying to use diamonds to pay for a meal at Taco Bell. You would have to literally cut up your diamond in a perfect $10 quantity in order to pay for your meal. And I don't think most restaurants have diamond cutting tools in them yet. Money must also be scarce. It can't just be everywhere. Literally, it cannot grow on trees. For if you could just take a leaf off a tree and use that as money, it wouldn't be worth anything because everyone would have unlimited access to it. And nobody wants that. Money must also be uniform. Every $20, $5, and $1 bill you find all have the same president's face and denomination on them, just like every $100 bill has a small trace of cocaine to it. It's that uniformity that lets us know it's all worth the same amount. And finally, you have acceptable. Money has to be accepted by people. For most of human history, this was a big problem where if you show up in another country, you might have dollar bills, but that's not worth anything to them there. They prefer cowrie shells and gold. This is also a big issue you see with modern cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. While Bitcoin does meet the rest of these criteria, it is still not formally accepted in most institutions. Why is this? Why is something as unvaluable as paper more valuable than data packages on the internet? Well, to understand that, there's a few more key terms we need to go over. Money needs to have a lot of different uses in order to be considered valuable by a society. The first and probably main use of money is it needs to be a medium of exchange, something that everyone is willing to trade for. Before money, you had what was called the barter system, where people would just trade goods for other goods. The issue is, if you only had one good and nobody wanted it, then you couldn't trade it for anything. Say I grew carrots but wanted a shirt. But the man who sells shirts was not a rabbit. He was a mole and did not want my carrots. Well, I would be out of luck. But with money, I know I can take my carrots, sell them at the market for money, and I can give that money to the shirt mole. Thus, I can use it as a medium of exchange. Another thing is money needs to be what's called a unit of account, something that all other things are compared to. If you saw a carrot at the store, it'll likely say the price is worth how many dollars it is. It never says that one $4 carrot is worth 4 chicken nuggets, a medium drink, and a very small and disappointing burger. Because the 4 for 4 meal is not a unit of account, dollars are. Finally, money needs to be a store of value. It needs to hold its value over time. So money plus time is still money. That $5 bill you have will still be a $5 bill 20 years from now. Plus or minus with inflation, that's a story for another day. While that milk you have in your fridge, while you did pay money for it and it is worth something right now, give that 20 years and you no longer have milk, you have cheese. And cheese has a different value altogether. But who controls the money in America? Well, in our case, our money is mostly controlled by an organization known as the Federal Reserve, usually shortened to Fed in news articles, talk shows, and by angry people who don't really know what they're talking about. The Fed's main job is to control the distribution and manage the legitimacy of money, making sure that it stays in circulation, we all have access to it, and that it's the real deal. They're also in charge of shredding money and making sure not too much of it is out there. We'll cover why in just a second, but first, I do want to clarify that the Federal Reserve does not physically print the money. They are simply the central banks employed by the government to manage it. The actual making of the money is by the Bureau of Engraving, which is part of the Department of Treasury. They're the ones who physically make the money. And if you're ever in Washington, D.C., you can even take a tour of the factory, though I'm afraid to say they don't give free souvenirs. As for why you would shred money, well, it's to control this idea of inflation. And this really is one of the main jobs of the Federal Reserve. And inflation is something so scary that if I had access to scary sound effects, I would play one after every time I say inflation. But what is it? Well, it's the fact that over time, if you keep making more money, the money that is already around will lose value. This goes back to the idea of scarcity. As something becomes less scarce, therefore, it'll become less valuable. It's why you can't just print more money to solve all your debts, because if you do, the money you print is worth less, and it makes all the money that is already around worth less. And eventually, your money will become worth less. So, you need to be able to control how much money is in circulation. Now, inflation will naturally rise over time. That's perfectly normal and can be very healthy for an economy. But you have to make sure everything rises with it. If you make $10 an hour and a car is $100, then you can own that car within 10 days. But if inflation rises and that car is now worth $10,000, but wages don't rise with inflation, so you're still making $10 an hour, suddenly there's a much higher barrier to entry to purchasing that vehicle, even though you're working the exact same as people did years ago, but inflation has kind of left your wages behind. And this comes to another problem with capitalism about the rise of wages to meet the need of inflation. But that's a story for another day. For now, what you need to know is Inflation is the idea that as we make more money, the money that's currently around will lose value. So the Federal Reserve, using the central banks, needs to make sure that inflation is under control so our money stays valuable until we are ready to retire and we can spend the last couple of years of our lives without the crushing fear of losing our jobs and work to pay for all these goods and services that are far more expensive. And I'm afraid that's all the time we have left for today. Thank you for joining us for this episode about money. Come back next week as we talk about supply and demand and how things get those prices they do when they always seem too expensive. Also, a shout out to all those who came to me or emailed me saying how much you enjoyed the last video and peer pressured me into coming in on Saturday to make more of these for you. Congratulations, you won. But until next week, I'm Mr. Thompson, this is Cedric the Skull, and we wish you a well and happy school week. Goodbye. It's low budget, very low budget. It's low budget economics with Cedric the Skull.